we found ways to take the potentially a bit dry sometimes policy messaging and make that interesting, and we're able to build a creative agency with offices in 3 countries off the back of it. So it can be done. It's sometimes tricky to do, and that's why many politicians don't do it, but it's really a test of how well do you know your ideas and your source material, how clear are you at communicating that, and if you've got good ideas and if you know how to communicate that well, then you're set up for success to do well on these platforms.
The New Zealand Tech Podcast, brought to you by Guerrilla Technology, proactive and strategic IT.
Hey folks, greetings and welcome along to the New Zealand Tech Podcast. I'm your host, Paul Spain. Today we're with Ben Guerin from Guerin to talk a little bit around the usual sort of tech news of the week, but also to delve a bit into sort of role of technology and digital media when it comes to politics and elections, which we're hitting it about the right time with the election this weekend, aren't we?
Timely time to have this chat. Probably not too much time for anyone to apply any lessons off the back of it, but great to be here.
Yeah, thank you for joining us. Now, before we go any further, I should say a big thank you to our show partners, to 1NZ, 2 Degrees, Spark, HP and Guerrilla Technology for their support of the New Zealand Tech Podcast. Maybe just a quick sort of intro on where you fit into this sort of, big wide world of tech and digital media and advertising, for those that don't know.
Absolutely. So I'm a co-founder of the creative agency Guerin. Way back in ancient time, I used to do digital stuff for John Key, and my business partner was also involved in politics. So we joined forces and set up a creative agency that set out to do digital a bit differently. So we worked on political campaigns. We worked with the National Party here in 2017 on the night we thought we'd won a brilliant campaign, done a great job, and then Winston came along and had something else to say, which seems to be a recurring thing in New Zealand. We went off overseas after that. We did campaigns in Australia, in the UK, and also started working with blue chip clients around the world, and sort of we've shared our lessons of working in politics, which is a pretty ruthless game. There's not a lot of time for big creative egos and big pretentious ideas. You've got to get results, you've got to get stuff done, and that served us pretty well to work with tech clients. We've done IPOs, we've helped clients expand, reach customers in new markets using that same playbook that we developed in political campaigning. So now we do it here in New Zealand, we do it in Australia, we do it in the UK, and for clients in about 40 other countries as well. Oh,
fascinating. Well, yeah, let's jump in. First up, in terms of local news, we've heard about Letterboxd, which they've been referred to as a sort of a Goodreads for movies. So, a place, sort of a social network really of sorts, and it was an independent social network, but they've just been, or a majority stake in them has been acquired. New Zealand entity, which is very much, global, and I think in the direction of 10 million users, but they've been sold at a valuation somewhere north of $50 million US dollars. Well, the 60% stake sold based on that overall valuation. So, yeah, really, always exciting to see, Kiwi founders that have built something, taken it out onto the global stage and managed to scale it. So, really, really encouraging to, to see that happening. There's always a little bit of, I guess, pain I feel when we see our, New Zealand, New Zealand-based or founded sort of innovative entities get sold off. But that's often part of the journey, and it creates an opportunity for a new pipeline of businesses and startups, and for those funds to be invested into other things. What's your take on this one, Ben?
Well, firstly, it's always great to hear about New Zealand businesses, building partnerships and sort of having opportunities to expand overseas. And, I think it's a 60% stake. It's not an out-and-out acquisition. These guys are really being backed to grow and, and get the support, both in terms of mentorship and networks, but also in terms of money in the bank to help them grow and reach, their potential and their ambitions for the business. And it's a really exciting space to be in. We've got such a crowded environment for streaming services, whether it's TV shows, whether it's movies. It's really hard to remember what's even available on different platforms. I was trying to track down Pirates of the Caribbean the other day. I swear I saw it on Netflix. Turns out it wasn't. Obviously, it's on Disney Plus. And it's just, You've got so many different media around out there that it's actually a really useful place in the market for people like Letterboxd to help inform people, share their opinions of what they love, where they can watch that content, share reviews. They're enriching that marketplace so that people can make better decisions about how to spend their time. And the fact that there's a Kiwi, team in behind it, all the better. But the one thing that, I think New Zealanders often underestimate is that we can't get rich selling things to ourselves. And, I think that's, my old boss, John Key, was pretty big on back in the day as we were negotiating the TPP. New Zealand is a trading country. We always have been. We always will. And we've got to back Kiwis to get out there and find ways to sell their products and services overseas. And it might mean that they have got to, move ship and, move overseas to build those relationships. But in the long run, if New Zealanders are succeeding and thriving in any market, then that ultimately helps New Zealand in the long run.
Yeah, no, it's always fun to hear about these things, and maybe we'll be able to drill in and talk to one of the founders in the future and get a little bit more details. But well done, and we'll look forward to seeing what comes next. Matt Buchanan and Carl von Rando, who started Letterboxd, really exciting. Now, the last few weeks we haven't sort of had any newsy episodes, so I haven't really had a chance to sort of drill in on Auckland Transport's situation with these recent cyber attacks. And to be fair, these situations don't seem to be slowing down, and the stats are looking pretty harsh in varying directions. Where actually I saw a report from Microsoft the other day. Their sort of stats at looking back at the mid-2022 to mid-2023 period, they were saying that BYOD, the bring your own sort of device model, which has been a reasonably popular thing over recent years, has been one of the biggest issues over that period in terms of these devices that aren't necessarily fully managed by an organisation, so therefore hard to secure in the way that would be the case for a completely organisationally controlled device. So I thought that was that was quite useful, because I think a lot of organisations or individuals within organisations will look at practices that have just become the norm over a period of time and just sort of feel like, hey, this is the way it is. We can log in from any device. We can work from anywhere. These different sort of scenarios. And actually we need to, put ourselves into 2023, not, what might have worked 5 years ago or 10 years ago, and it was a convenience thing to give full access to everything from anywhere. And so we have to rethink some of these practices. Now, I haven't drilled into all the detail on exactly what's happened to behind the scenes at Auckland Transport. No doubt some further info will come out later. But I think one of the things that stood out for me was that they communicated quite quickly. They had, I guess, sort of in contrast to the Waikato District Health Board, where there was an incident and it seemed to impact absolutely everything. We had something here that was isolated to the HOP system, their payment cards and top ups and so on. Hopefully that's sort of a sign of the times that larger organisations are slicing and dicing up their networks and their security. So when there is an incursion, it's not the whole lot that gets wiped out, but it's it's smaller pieces, and the same for organisations of any kind. So I think there were some encouraging things in there. It was a bit rough to sort of see. One day it's a cyber attack, ransomware type scenario, and then a few days later they're getting pummeled with a distributed denial of service attack. Maybe that's just part of the new sort of modus operandi for these players. If they don't get a payout, then they'll put on whatever extra pressure they can. What's your take? How did it impact you? Because you've been using a bit of public transport while you've been back in New Zealand.
Yeah, I mean, I'm normally based in London, so my girlfriend and I have come down here for a couple of months. Obviously to be around during that campaign time and sort of see family and whatnot, and not having a car. Firstly, in Auckland, it really goes to show this is a driving city. You feel a bit stranded here. I'm used to just walking and cycling if we're in London, so feeling, a little bit like a fish out of water. Yeah. And then had a great day trip planned. We're going to take the bus up to Long Bay, and we're all stressed out because thinking, right, there's been a hack. What does it mean? And I think it goes to show for any organization, cybersecurity and sort of threats and attacks like this are about when, not if. Every organization of any size is going to be facing threats like these. As you've said, I think AT communicated it pretty well. The first question everyone has is, are the buses running? What information am I going to have to disrupt my journey or to plan my journey? Is my personal data at risk? I think they did a good job of informing people of that. There's a classic, was it George Bush quote, fool me once, shame on me, fool me twice, shame on you, can't be fooled again. He got a bit confused about it. But basically, it's one thing to get cyber attacked once, twice in a row starts to raise a few questions. And I think, as you say, it's probably highly likely that these were related in some way and sort of part of that same attack. It does go to show that one of the big things you can do as an organisation like AT did is try and limit that risk. You can't stop it happening at all. It'd be great if you could. What you can do is communicate things, limit that risk, and let people get on with their days. I think the real question, particularly for a lot of small business owners and sort of startup founders and whatnot, is when you're a smaller business without potentially the resources that someone like AT does or to Whata Ora does in the case of hospitals and whatnot, how can you protect yourselves? Because you're just as much of a target. A lot of our clients have been seeing a massive increase in spam requests or spam messages in their social media channels. We've been seeing a few other people I've been talking to in the marketing space have had to cancel promotions that they've been running because they've just been overwhelmed by spam messages. I think there's a real increase in the amount of sort of, attempted fraud and sort of scam behavior online. And it's just a rising risk that all businesses need to be prepared for. And when businesses are facing, high cost of living, rising fuel costs, massive inflation, putting pressure on their balance sheets, cybersecurity is, I think, for a lot of businesses, just too much, right? It's seen as put in the too hard basket, and you just hope that you're not going to be hit and maybe that someone won't notice you.
Yeah, it's one of those unfortunate sort of challenges that is across all organisations in different ways, and I think it's unique to each organisation. I think one of the encouraging things for the sort of smaller to medium organisations is in a lot of cases their technology platforms are simpler, and so being able to lower your risk profile from a cybersecurity perspective doesn't have the same sort of challenges as, for instance, a Waikato District Health Board, who had hundreds of maybe even thousands of different systems and software and technologies and things to try and cater to, and trying to deal with that sometimes decades after a particular piece of technology has been introduced, and trying to document it and secure it and maintain it properly. Incredibly complex, whereas a smaller organisation, and I imagine this will be the case for for you and your team, you just don't have that sort of same spread of technologies. You can be very much cloud based and avoiding all of these sort of proprietary systems and servers to a big degree. And it doesn't mean you're not going to have different things sitting around the place that do need to be secured and do have their own complexities, but certainly you multiply the size and the years that an organization's been around, and unless it's been run really, really well, which I don't think there's any perfect examples out there.
Yeah, if you find any,
then lots and lots of challenges there, right?
That is the case, and I think technical debt has always been a problem for organisations as they scale, and that some of these more recent cybersecurity incidents have just gone to show the sort of cybersecurity risk of that technical debt. There are always advantages to keeping things simple. And managing your risk profile from a cybersecurity point of view is another one of them. If you can just piggyback off Office 365 or Google Apps or Slack, inbuilt security protocols, then you're minimizing your risk enormously.
It certainly helps. Although the out of the box is often not necessarily at the right sort of level, but at least get you started. And now let's get into politics a little bit. You were sort of talking about social media and spam and so on. I'm kind of curious, what you've been seeing. We've had, X, which was Twitter, and we've seen Musk sort of steering that in a direction where those that are paying a subscription get a lot more sort of visibility of their posts, or what we used to call their tweets. And even some talk or suggestion that maybe the platform goes entirely paid. Now, when you look at the sort of spam challenges that we get in social media on social media platforms, this idea that you've got to have jumped through these extra hoops, prove you're a human, make payments, and so on, rather than having armies of, a million fake Twitter accounts or, whatever it is in sort of the worst case scenarios. Does that make sense to you, or do you think that Musk is dreaming, and if they did flick a switch and make X a completely, a platform that's limited entirely to, to paid users, that it would collapse? Because I think we've heard a lot of commentary around the sort of the death of Twitter, and we've seen varying sort of competing platforms, but I think in reality, if we kind of look at how active Twitter is, it's maybe moved around a little bit, but not dramatically up, not dramatically down. I think depending on who you talk to and whose stats you look at, there are variances, but it's certainly not as though Twitter has kind of disappeared. Certainly, there are users that have dropped out or become more active on other platforms. But even in most cases where I've seen people jump onto other platforms, they tend to be still doing most of their activity because they've got the reach on X.
Yeah, I mean, X has. I still can't bring myself to call it X. It's Twitter. Let's be honest. It's Twitter. And Twitter. People have tried to kill Twitter, or Twitter's tried to kill itself so many times, more times than I could, can recall. It's a platform that kind of came into being by accident, right? If anyone who sort of read up on the history of Twitter will know that it started as a podcast business that sort of accidentally became a social media platform. And throughout most of its history, there's this tension between some of the co-founders thought that Twitter was all about saying what you're up to, and it was a status tool, and other co-founders saying that it's all about sharing your opinions and shaping the world. And that tension meant that Twitter's kind of lots of things and not very many things. And it's accidentally become this incredible cultural force because it is the best platform for talking about what's happening right now. And when something's happening right now, whether it's a natural disaster, an election debate, like conflict like we've seen break out in Gaza in the last couple of days, which has just been absolutely tragic. And X and Twitter has been where a lot of that content has been shared with the world. When things happen, we're human. We want to know about it. And we go to the platform where we can find that out. And Twitter X has been that platform, and quite frankly will continue to be that platform for the foreseeable. It's been tried so many times in so many different ways to displace Twitter as the platform for now, and no one's quite got it. There are lots of reasons why this could be the case. So one of them is the social graph, right? Twitter is the hundreds or thousands of most interesting people you know, and you've curated that list over time if you're active on that platform, right? And so when something's happening, you're going there and you're knowing that the people that you're following are going to show you that content. But one thing that Elon has done to his credit to help, increase the sort of relevance of Twitter during these events is he's increased the amount of content that appears in your feed from people that you don't follow. And that's actually following in the footsteps of how TikTok works.
Depending on which view you choose, right? Because you've either got your timeline view or the for you.
You've got your view, but I think how many people have changed the default setting? My job is social media. I have never changed the default setting on Instagram. Like, Instagram's the same thing, right? You can change it for you following. Have you ever changed that?
No, I don't think so. Yeah.
Right. I mean,
not that I spend a lot of time on Instagram, but yeah, I get it. Right. That's the way most of us are.
We're creatures of habit.
We'll take what we're given, especially if you've got to kind of dig to change things around too, right?
And Facebook actually tried this once where they, had people, because everyone's always saying that Facebook changed the algorithm. They just want to see updates from their friends. Well, guess what? If you only saw updates from your friends, it would be the most mind-numbing, boring platform on the planet. Like, we want to see the stuff that we kind of admit, we don't want to admit to want to see. And so, when Facebook tried showing on their feed a completely unfiltered version of the news feed, people absolutely hated it and gave up on the platform. So when people complain about the algorithm, we're kind of we're lying to ourselves a little bit. Ultimately, we want to see what we want to see. That's why these algorithms work in the way that they work. So what's happened on Twitter is they own what's happening at the moment. No one else can really take that from Twitter. It's the best way to get up to speed on something with really dense information, and that's why it still has that place in our culture.
So looking at that role of X, Twitter, whatever you're going to call it, how are things playing out in in the current election here in New Zealand, and what are you sort of seeing around the world when it comes to elections and X and other platforms? Because we heard about Russian propaganda bots on Twitter. At one point suggesting they helped Trump win. I see just looking some of the news items. The Intercept published an article saying that they didn't help him in 2016. So there's always varying opinions on how these things work. But if we're starting to maybe get a bit more of a handle on some of the bots on some platforms, but I'd say maybe overall it's actually getting a lot worse. So how does it play out? And what do you think we should be worried about in terms of that sort of manipulation of elections?
People should be worried about all sorts of things with social media, their personal screen time being top among them. Look, there's no denying that bots are a real issue on every platform to different degrees. But a lot of the discussion around this topic falls into a trap of fundamental attribution error. We think bots sound scary. Russian bot farms sound really scary. So when we hear things we don't like, we jump them in with that sort of scary explanation. The reality is, Trump ran a campaign that had a message that resonated with a lot of people in America who felt like politics wasn't working for them. And a lot of people who don't like admitting that to themselves say it was Russian interference that led to that election. It wasn't. I mean, yes, Russian interference took place. Led to some specific incidences and has certainly been recognised and probed and sort of dove into. But fundamentally, to say that the Trump outcome was because of Russian interference is to be dishonest about the state of politics and about the concerns, legitimate concerns, that so many voters have. So, same thing with the bot conversation on Twitter. Facebook forces people to register with their real names. If you try and use a fake name on Facebook, your profile will probably be shut down pretty quickly. But anyone who's been on Facebook knows that it can be a cesspit of despair. So often the comment section on Facebook is with hate being thrown around, people being, verbally abused. It's not necessarily a nice place to be. And that's on a platform where you do have to be authorized and use a real name. So I think a lot of people thinking that cracking down on bots on Twitter will solve our political problems are guilty of wishful thinking. It's not as simple as that.
And look, solving political problems is, is there ever an answer to sort of solve our political problems? I guess the way I sort of, look at it is, countries like New Zealand, we tend to vote one way for a little while, then it's like, oh, there's certain things that enough people get to a point of no, we don't like that. Population sort of votes a little bit more the other way for a little while, and it's like, oh, we're getting a little bit off on whatever the other things. It sort of just seems to swing backwards and forwards, and I guess my very simplistic kind of viewpoint is that that's probably as kind of as good as it's going to get, and you get a little bit of balance, and folks get that option to nudge things in a different direction. If I guess a certain level of the populace doesn't like where we're going, and in general in New Zealand we've been pretty fortunate in terms of stable governments, and we've got a democracy. We get a chance to make some choices. Probably small enough population that maybe there hasn't been the interest from or as much interest, hopefully, from sort of international interference. But the realities of that, I think, it's probably a little bit hard to know for sure.
Yeah, I think it's tricky to say whether there's any kind of foreign interference. I think if there was, people would notice it pretty easily.
You would tend to think so.
There are sort of signals. When we were working with the UK government during the COVID-19 pandemic, our job was to share public health messages with people. We coined the slogan "Stay home, protect the NHS, save lives" to simplify the government strategy and get people to stay home during COVID. And one of the big challenges that government was concerned about was interference. Supporting the anti-vax movement, supporting a lot of the conspiracy theories that were jeopardizing public safety, and so it was a real concern there. And we were sort of kept up to date with a lot of the threat monitoring that was taking place, and a lot of it could be traced back to foreign state actors. And there are markers where you can attribute this work. And there are also tactics that you can employ to inoculate audiences against disinformation, which is something that we've done a lot of for our clients, particularly in the government space, and also for major corporates who are dealing with similar challenges. You can proactively get your messages out there to inform your audience of what to expect and how to identify and manage that disinformation. Ultimately, it comes down to the people most likely to be vulnerable to disinformation are disengaged, uninformed voters. So we can look for, a magic bullet to solve disinformation, or we can all just try and do a better job at keeping our friends and family updated about what's going on in the world. And again, we talked at the beginning with the IT security stuff around simple solutions. It's the same thing with our politics. Set out a vision for what you think should happen, if you're a politician. If you're interested in politics, share your opinions with people in a healthy and conducive way. And, if people, participate in debate in like a positive way like that, that actually goes a really long way to inoculating against some of these threats of disinformation.
Yeah, and look, and there needs to be that room to discuss things, and, there can be downsides to two aspects of discussing things online, but there can also be a lot of good that comes from, I guess, the openness and so on of the internet to, discuss things rather than, things having to be sort of behind, closed doors as it were. I mean, people are very quickly and easily sort of cancelled these days. Now, we were chatting before we started around, online platforms that sort of let you look at how, say different politicians have voted and look at legislation and the like. And we were chatting about a tool I had a look at that I don't think it's been launched publicly yet, but was a tool to sort of help support, democracy in New Zealand with opening up access to legislation and so on. And you mentioned a platform in the UK. I forget what was it called?
They work for you. Yeah,
they work for you. Yeah. And so we're seeing technology have this increasing role in democracy, but also there's complexities to it. So I was kind of curious around what you've seen there in the UK. So that website, theyworkforyou.com, which is tied in to an entity, My Society, who are at My Society .org have been around for about 20 years. But what have you learned from these platforms, and how do you see things sort of playing out? Because we often go to technology to I guess sort of get through the complexity and understand what's happening with legislation, who should we vote to, but also a lot of it just comes through, I don't know, social media and what we catch in sort of mainstream media, and in those channels it can be hard to sort of filter it down to what's relevant for me in my local electorate in a current election, right? It's like everyone's throwing stuff in all different directions. I guess the televised debates are one of those sort of sources people go to. But there's very much information overload, and often there's not a kind of a clear comparison. But what do you see in terms of the different technologies, and what your thoughts are on the right approach for kind of filtering through everything?
Well, it's a really interesting topic, and I'm hugely bullish on the internet. I'm hugely bullish on humanity. I think that the more people can connect with each other, share ideas, and build communities in support of their vision, the better world we'll all live in. So on the whole, I think the internet has been a net positive. And so I want to start with that. People can get very worked up about disinformation and think of social media as this terrible place. Social media is where life happens, and when life happens, great things happen. Now, in terms of the way that technology is used in the sort of political discourse, the sites like They Work For You are really interesting, and this other one that you mentioned is sort of under development. Where they show what a particular MP may have voted on, or comments that they've made in the House, and they can sort of package this up in a way that people can easily see which politicians might share their views. At a surface level, it sounds really straightforward, and why wouldn't you support something like that? And that's why these tools abroad and sort of obviously under development here as well have been really popular. But there's always a risk when you oversimplify, because to simplify is to take information out of something, and sometimes you can take the wrong information out. So a good example is Caroline Lucas is the leader of the Green Party in the UK, and on her They Work For You profile, it says that she's sometimes in favour of fracking and sometimes against fracking, which seems a bit confusing for a Green Party MP in the UK, where fracking is a big issue that the Greens are opposed to. And it's because some legislation she opposed because it didn't go far enough to stop fracking, and other legislation she opposed because it was about fracking. And some of that nuance of why politicians vote down a particular bill can be lost when you reduce it to a simplistic one-sentence summary. So there are other platforms out there where there's been a lot of sort of human curation. So Policy NZ that the spin-off team have pulled together is a fantastic resource. I'd encourage anyone who's undecided to sort of check it out and look at the summaries of the party's politics. But they also suffer from one of these main challenges. And you could call it bias. I don't think it's necessarily bias. It's just the reality of condensing information. If you go there, they've got some sort of algorithm that highlights key policies for different sections. And policies that are chosen as the key policies are quite confusing in some of these topics. It's probably quite different. If any of these politicians looked up there and looked at how their policies are being prioritised, they might feel that doesn't necessarily reflect how they've been talking about their talking points during debates. And we want to inform people of what these political parties stand for. We want to cut through the spin and show them the facts. But ultimately, you do lose some context along the way. And there's one other big part to it which it's easy to forget, and that is picking your politician is not the same as picking a toothbrush on the shelf. You can't quite look at the features and whether it's soft, hard, or medium bristles and how many circles it's got to brush your molars or whatnot. Politicians are a little bit more complicated than that.
Hey, it's hard enough to pick the right toothbrush, all right?
Yeah, I know. I'm a sucker. I'm more about the Philips electric one. It's brilliant. Highly recommend. But it's really tricky to vote to support your to choose which politician you're going to pick, because it's not just about the policies that they commit to. Because politicians can commit to all sorts of policies. When you're voting, you're also choosing which politicians do you think can actually work together with their own party and with other parties. Because we're an MMP, everyone's going to make trade-offs, right? Every single party has policies that they're going to have to cut when they're going to be in coalition talks. So what you're actually voting for are the people that you think are going to be most likely to get those policies across. And there's a risk that when we try and condense everything down to voting records and policy summaries, that we forget that politics is about people. And a good example of this is, several people I know have done these sorts of quizzes, and they've said, gosh, I did all the quiz and I came out saying that I should vote top, but I'd never vote top. I don't really like the people in there. They seem a bit odd. And, I haven't followed top too closely, but, they've contested a few elections now. They haven't had any MPs. They've got all sorts of interesting policies, but fundamentally, people clearly don't back those politicians to actually deliver on those policies. And that means that there's a disconnect between what these tools like Vote Compass or, these other calculators spit out and what people actually think.
It's a complex area, but I think it's encouraging to have access to technological tools to help us. But we do risk having that information overload. There is so much data, so much information. And, of course, everything you look at is going to, have to come through a lens of some sort. I was looking through the Policy NZ. We went into one section, and I'm scrolling down looking for the political parties, and I'm like, okay, I can see some of them in there, but I can't see all of them. And so obviously sort of varies on different things as to what they drill down on. National, who probably largely sort of considered to be ones that are very focused on the economy. So I flicked into economy and I sort of scrolled down the list. I'm like, is National even in this list? And then they're at the bottom of the list. And then I went out and came back in again, and they were actually, I think they were in a different order. So maybe it sort of randomizes to mix it up. But yeah, quite fascinating in that in each of these things, they have boiled it down to some very, very small sort of simple summaries in each area. But they do go into a whole bunch of different aspects. So yeah, definitely a useful resource.
But what I would say is this is a huge disconnect between what the way that the tools like Policy NZ frame the act of voting, right, as a very methodical, information-intensive, time-intensive task, and then you compare that to any of the political debates that have been screened, where you spend a couple of minutes on a topic, then you jump onto something else. There's a lot of shouting. It's a very high-stress experience. It's not quite as high stakes as the All Blacks Ireland game will be this weekend, but it's not far off, particularly that one with Paddy Gower. It's politics on TV is an entertainment sport. It's a blood sport. It's really exciting and it's quite emotive. And then what these tools do is it's very much left and right brain, right? These guys, they look at a very different way of making that voting decision. It'd be great if we met somewhere a little bit more in the middle, where some of these tools reflected the people behind some of these policies, and if we had a bit more policy in our debates as well.
Yeah. Sometimes that can be lacking. And in one of the other resources is Vote Compass, which had some details through from University of Auckland. We're talking about that online tool to help voters sort of align their own views with the political parties. So that's some of their team have been involved in. It's been going for quite a number of years now, and that comes under sort of subset of TVNZ's website, so votecompass.tvnz.co.nz. So another resource to look into. You can jump in there, put in your postcode, and then start filling out their survey. And from that, I guess you get the feedback and what's being highlighted as relevant to your own viewpoints and so on. So yeah, really, really interesting to see the role of technology. And so, what can you share with us, around the different sort of campaigns you've been involved in over the years? I know we're in the middle of election at the moment, and the media have reported you've been working with National Party. That's current, but what are the sort of your general sort of observations and some of your past learnings? And anything you can share from this one that's that's not secret squirrel?
Well, I think the big thing with a political campaign is it's one of the few things that actually cuts across all sorts of groups of people. We live our lives in these little boxes of the sports teams that we watch, the work that we do, our friends and family, and the media we consume. And then along comes something like a Taylor Swift concert or a political campaign or a Rugby World Cup, and it just cuts right across all our social groupings and we all get caught up in the excitement of it. Now, Taylor Swift, I think, is coming in a couple of weeks just to Australia. So anyone who's lucky enough to go to that, it's already sorted. Those unlucky enough, including myself, we're just going to pretend that we're there. The Rugby World Cup's going okay so far, and good luck for the weekend. We'll see how we get on. So we're left with politics, and it's something that cuts across these social groupings because it affects all of us, right? It affects all of us every day in our lives in terms of who's going to be running the country.
And we all get that opportunity to participate, right?
Exactly. It affects us. It's something that we can all choose to do. New Zealand's got really high political participation rates, which is fantastic. We don't have to have compulsory voting like in Australia, which I think is a good thing. And so for us as a creative agency that started out in politics, one of the good things that we've been able to learn really is that when you've done a political campaign, it's much easier to explain to people who you are and the work you've done, rather than saying, "Oh, we did this campaign for this shoe shine company. Do you want to look at it?" No, trust us, it's really good. Politics is something that immediately gives you that sense of relevance and helps tell potential clients what you're up for. So, we did in 2019, we worked on the Conservative campaign with Boris Johnson, and one of the things that we did in the final week of the campaign was a few days before Christmas was the election, and we recreated that iconic scene from Love Actually, which is, by the way, a brilliant rom-com movie that's really been completely cancelled. And when you watch it back these days, you go, how on earth was this ever acceptable? But we love it anyway, and it's got this cultural cachet. So Boris Johnson's holding the signs, and he's saying, vote Conservative. Here's why you need to get Brexit done. All these campaign messages, and it worked because it was a shot-for-shot remake of the scene. We spent a long time making sure that the Christmas lights were in exactly the right place and all the rest of it. But it also worked because everyone knew that scene. And when that went on TV, you can't really do normal political TV broadcast advertising in the UK. There are only a couple of limited slots, so you get sort of 3 slots in a campaign. This is the last slot. So it was primetime broadcast. Everyone watched it. We supported it on social media. And it was just a great way to wrap up the campaign. It was humorous, it was entertaining, most importantly of all, and it got the message across. And it meant that, they got an 80% majority. We won't attribute all of that to the ad, but that was.
I'm sure you'd like to try.
That's got to account for at least half of it, right? It was just one of the thousands of ads we did over that particular campaign, but it's the most memorable because it's relatable and people can understand that. So it meant that when we were going to market and we launched properly in the UK beginning of 2020, just before the world shut down for COVID, when we were having conversations with clients, they knew what we had actually done, which is really timely. But the key lesson for that is, whether you're selling a politician or a toothbrush, or anything in between, you've ultimately got to recognize that no one really wakes up in the morning and wants to listen to an ad. Your ads have got to be entertaining because you need to get people's attention so they actually pay, actually listen, actually engage, and might even just remember something that you've done. And that's a key lesson. So, I think politicians in this campaign have tried all sorts of ways to be entertaining. Some of them have fallen a bit flat. Politicians aren't the best comedians. Some of them, I think, have gone pretty well. And I think one area where, National have done particularly well has been, the use of TikTok, both by the party and by Christopher Luxon. They've fully embraced this platform. Christopher Luxon the other day did a Get Ready With Me, where he sort of tried on his outfits for the day, which is a popular TikTok trend. And, it's an authentic use of the platform. It's funny content. It's not trying to ram a policy explanation down someone's throat. When people are scrolling through the TikTok app, they're looking for entertainment. They're looking for something funny or educational or useful or interesting. And when National's presenting its policies in a way that feels authentic on the platform, that's a great way to cut through to voters. So the key lesson of whether you're doing political campaigning in New Zealand, UK, anywhere else, or if you're selling anything at all, is just finding ways to make it entertaining so that you can win that battle of the thumbs, get people to stop scrolling, watch your ad through, and hopefully do something off the back of it.
Yeah, it is such a fascinating area. I guess there's always a flip side to these things, though, right? So having to boil things down to social media means you have to, in a lot of cases, either simplify it or you just entertain people, and that puts your brand out there in one way or another. I remember chatting to a friend in Philippines around their last election campaign, and for those that have, I guess, have been around a little bit longer like me, it seemed a shock that that another Marcos could, potentially, end up as president of the Philippines after the previous dramas on the from the current president's parents going back a few decades, but chatting to someone around Bongbong Marcos, it seemed to quite a big degree that in his campaign he was able to entertain a lot of youngsters, so sort of swayed their voting, and pretty much sort of send a message that his parents didn't do anything sort of bad, which I think probably most of us in the Western world sort of might not agree with. So I don't know. There's definitely some complexities around technology and its role in just being able to get messages out sort of en masse. Obviously, I think there wouldn't be too many people that look at politicians and say, hey, they're always honest with us 100% of the time. So there's these aspects of how much spin goes into the messaging and into social media. But yeah, I don't know. I don't know where I kind of fall on how good or bad social media is in general when it sort of comes to politics. I think I would probably, in most cases, lean on the direction of, look, it's allowed us to be sort of more educated, but there are fish hooks to social media in the election process too.
But I think it's also because of the potential of social media to build an audience to get that message out. It means that everyone's got the same toolkit. Because 50 years ago, if you wanted to be an ACT, a Te Pāti Māori, a Green, a Top, a whoever, you never had a chance. Forgetting the electoral system being different otherwise. The newspapers are not going to carry your message, unless you've got a relationship with the editors, unless you've sort of really invested huge chunks of time and money into doing that. But these days, it's a real battle of ideas. It's a battle of ideas because it's all about what you're saying, how you're getting it across, and if you're able to strike a chord with people, then then you'll be rewarded commensurately. So in some ways, there are scary parts of social media. You see the rise of populist leaders and particularly in emerging economies, and it sets alarm bells ringing. I would actually go further. I'd say this is a sign for centrist, reasonable, international politicians to say you got to up your game, because if a populist who's out there saying entertaining things and sort of holds pretty sort of out there opinions is doing a better job of than you, imagine how much support you could get if you took up those same tools. So when we started Topham Guerin back in 2016. We came from a place where the centre-right traditionally was pretty rubbish at social media. The Greens around that time were really, really strong. Labour was pretty good. National was all right. And sort of we took the view of saying, well, just because you're, on the conservative side of politics, New Zealand doesn't really have any sort of real conservative politics, at that scale, but just because you're on that side of the fence doesn't mean your style of communication has to be conservative. And so we, introduced memes into the political discourse. We sort of took some risks with creative. We, found ways to take the potentially a bit dry sometimes policy messaging and make that interesting. And we're able to build a creative agency with offices in 3 countries off the back of it. So it can be done. It's sometimes tricky to do, and that's why many politicians don't do it. But it's really a test of how well do you know your ideas and your source material? How clear are you at communicating that? And if you've got good ideas, and if you know how to communicate that well, then you're set up for success to do well on these platforms.
Yeah, interesting. And just sort of edging off a little bit to once we have a party that's in power, they've got there's so much messaging that needs to happen. And you talked about having to do work there during COVID. And I saw a little bit of media coverage around some fun trying to do that stuff in New Zealand, and sometimes things aren't as well received and so on. But there is this sort of need for governments to communicate. And when I look at some of the topics we talk about here on the podcast, cybersecurity, data privacy, scams, and so on. I mean, that's an area we need to educate more and more people on, right? Do you think social media is being used well enough in some of these other areas where we to do better, we've got to keep communicating, and social media seems like it's a pretty good bang for buck in terms of communicating with people. I think podcast is probably an interesting one where could government entities and governments be utilizing podcasts more? I mean, even during the election cycles, we've seen a little bit of that, and we've done a little bit of work over the years, with politicians, hiring out our studios here in Auckland for political related podcasts. But I mean, what do you think about that broader use of social media, to communicate some of these important messages?
I think there's a huge job to be done. New Zealand the New Zealand government's missing, a lot of low-hanging fruit in terms of using social media better. We're working at the moment with the UK government on sort of a lot of public health briefs where, we did a lot of work during COVID. Now we're taking some of the lessons that we learned and sort of dealing with a public health emergency, and we're changing the way that the government is recruiting social care workers using social media and ambassadors. We're changing the way that advertising is going out around stopping smoking, improving mental health, increasing uptake of things like child immunisations. Really important priorities for any government, and many of these areas have been election issues here in New Zealand. And in New Zealand, for example, in child immunisations, we've gone backwards over the last few years. COVID's partly to blame, but we've also gotten complacent with how important it is to explain carefully to parents why immunisations matter. And the reality is, social media is where parents are seeing misinformation about vaccines and stuff like that. The government has to be there to inoculate against these messages, to get their side of the story out, to share the facts so that parents are reassured to vaccinate their kids. That's just one example of many where the government's been a little bit, different departments for various reasons have either been a little bit too risk averse or, haven't known what needs to be done. And as a result, have often relied on traditional broadcast mechanisms. New Zealand has an amazing culture of great TV advertising for government. NZ Road Safety, the NZTA stuff for sort of road safety is a classic example. We've done internet safety with, was it those like 2 porn stars came over to the kid's house? I think was Special or someone did that. Like, we've got great agencies here in New Zealand doing awesome advertising, but it's so often just on traditional channels. We're not converting that into great use of social. It's because it's a bit hard to explain, it's a bit hard to do well, but that's where the opportunity is. You can improve your value for money, you can take on the misinformation and the barriers that people have to doing things like getting immunised, doing smear tests, doing all these things that they need to do to improve the health of their people or sort of access government services. And that's where we're really exciting to see more progress.
Yeah, I think it's going to be an interesting time ahead as the sort of social media world sort of evolves and matures, and agencies like yours are definitely encouraging that stronger leverage of technology, which I think we've got to look at and use technology where it's appropriate. And I think more and more we've got to recognise that you can't just throw stuff at television, right? Because there's a whole percentage of the population that's not watching television. So things are getting more and more splintered in terms of where you hit people, and then depending on on where you are watching, is there advertising? Can you turn it off? So I'm trying to think of where I catch advertising, but YouTube, for instance. Hey, I've got a subscription, so I don't have to, put up with the advertising. So, some of the normal sort of mechanisms that might reach, chunks of people, individuals will have a chance to turn those things off or just don't go there. So, it creates some fun challenges to I'm sure, keep yourself and your team pretty occupied.
Plenty of fun challenges, that's for sure.
Anything else that you wanted to mention when it comes to the sort of world of politics and digital?
I think people can really easily look at political discussion. We talked about things like bots and spam and whatnot, and we can get caught up in thinking that it's all about foreign interference or these big fads or generative AI or whatever's getting headlines one day or another. But ultimately, political campaigning, just like any kind of business or marketing, is just about knowing your audience, knowing what it is that you might be able to say to them to convince them to change their minds or change their behavior, working out which channels you can actually leverage to reach them, and then just testing different ways of saying that message and different ways of delivering that on those channels until you're getting the desired outcome. And to the best that you can, distinguish what's working well from what's working not. And the thing with politics is you don't know until election day whether your ads are working. You've got to be comfortable with a bit of and even then, you can't. I would love it if I said, "Oh yeah, everyone we've won, that was down to the ads. Everyone we didn't win, that was something else." You can't attribute political campaigning in that way. So you've got to be comfortable with uncertainty, and I think that's something that every business leader has had to deal with in some way or another. And we've got to be more comfortable with uncertainty and know that we won't always be able to attribute everything back to a specific channel or a specific creative, and that's okay as long as we have models of understanding our messaging, our marketing, and our sort of view of the world to have reasonably informed hypotheses about what's working and what's not. So then the key thing to take away is that politics is a lot like any other kind of marketing. Do the basics well and just focus on testing and experimenting and until something's working.
And from an individual sort of perspective that's using the technology, I think follow the sort of people that you want to hear from. You can create that kind of curated view through your social media channels. That's going to be helpful, but most of the platforms are going to give you a bit of a broader view, which I think is quite helpful. And like some of it, some of the content we see on social media will shock us or we'll disagree with, and so on. And we've seen that in the last few days with the war that's going on. But it also helps you just understand the different lens and through which different folks look at the world, and I think that's actually really important when it comes to politics and comes to elections, is to recognise, hey, yep, we are different, we see things differently based on all manner of factors, but ultimately we're still people, and we got to get along with those who we don't necessarily agree with all the time, and we keep open minds to be learning new things, and the internet is I think overall an incredible sort of source for information and for being more informed. Yep, not everything we're going to read is going to be perfectly accurate, and so on. But there's a lot out there we can drill into. We've got access to more information than we've ever had before. So yeah, we should take advantage of it for good purposes. Now, I was hoping to sort of drill in a little bit, but I think we're out of time into some of what's happening, because you're about to sort of be traveling back to the UK as we move into more passport-free scenarios around the world. I think Singapore is coming on stream as the second country where you'll be able to, or at least the second country. I think there's a level of this you can probably do in the US as well. Where you can go to a full sort of digital ID for your border crossing. So yeah, there's some interesting stuff there, but we'll have to save that for another episode to drill in. So yeah, it's been really good to catch up and to have you on the show, Ben.
Oh no, brilliant! Thanks so much, and I love what you're saying at the end there about it's all about being open-minded. The number one thing anyone should do off the back of this podcast is go and follow a politician or political party on social media that you don't necessarily agree with, and it's probably the best thing you can do.
Good. All right. Well, thanks everyone for joining us. Big thank you to our show partners. It's 2 Degrees, Spark, HP, 1NZ, and Gorilla Technology. And we will catch you again on the next episode of the New Zealand Tech Podcast. All right. See ya.
The New Zealand Tech Podcast, brought to you by Guerrilla Technology, proactive and strategic IT.